Let's open this up in prayer.
Father, I thank you for your love. And I thank you for your presence with us. I pray that we would be open to receive you. And I thank you for the hearts that are open to you to teach us. I pray that you would bless those who speak. I pray that you would be with those online and at home. I thank you for your life in us. I pray that we will continue to move forward and draw closer to you. I thank you that you teach us new things every day. I pray that we wouldn't get stuck on past things, but always ready to move forward. I thank you for each one that could make it here today. I pray that you be here with us. I pray these things in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Who wants to read the first part? A lot of Chinese names.
I have no issue. I don't have no issue.
Elijah, I don't know if you can speak, but do you want to read the first part and then Jaden can read the second? Maybe not.
Yeah, I'd have to. I think my book is in my car.
Oh, okay. Then Jaden can read the first part and I can do the second, I guess.
Sounds good to me. Gongbo Liao submitted an accusation against Zilu to the head of the Ji family. Zifu Jingbo reported this to Confucius, adding, "That master, i.e. Jing Kangzi, must have certainly been led astray by Gongbo Liao. But my influence with him is still sufficient to see to it that Gongbo Liao's corpse is displayed at court or in the marketplace." The master said, "Whether or not the way is to be put into action is a matter of fate. Whether or not the way is to be discarded is also a matter of fate. What power does Gongbo Liao have to affect fate?"
These names are so interesting. Probably very elegant names if you speak the language. But
I mean, the only real difference I would say from like the English pronunciation and Chinese is like a little bit of like air, like the hall, like that noise is like the Chinese pronunciation, which I feel uncomfortable doing with.
It's on the letter section. They completely different sounds as well. So.
Well, yeah, I just mean with these ones.
I really like Zifu Jimbo.
Oh yeah, right.
With an English translation.
Jingbo.
Yeah.
Okay, Jaden is.
They didn't do anything wrong. Like I said, it's just
Jingbo and Gringbo.
Okay. That's just too much.
Now we're just playing with words. Come on,
Yeah.
get serious. He's talking about killing somebody and having their corpse displayed.
Yeah. Elijah could probably correct me, but I would think it would be closer to Zifu Jingbo, like bo instead of bo.
It's gonna be like Zifu Jingbo.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
But that's what I'm saying. The pronunciation is the same. The only difference is the hall. That's what I was saying.
Okay, let me try. I'll at least try. Zilu was at this time presumably working as steward for the Ji family. Zifu Jingbo, a minister in the state of Liu Baonan claims that he was a kinsman of the Meng family, is claiming that he has enough influence with Ji Kangzi that he can both convince him of Zilu's innocence and see to it that his fellow minister, Gongbo Liao, is punished for his slander. The punishment in such a case of ministerial malfeasance, yeah, would be public execution, after which, according to Jiao custom, the corpse would be displayed in public for 3 days. Confucius, sure of his correctness and the correctness of his disciple, sees no need for such
Machinations.
machinations. The attitude expressed here is not so much passive fatalism as a surety in one's own rectitude and a confidence that heaven's will shall be done. As Jing Erqi comments.
There's a lot of names in this one too.
Yeah. That which is certain and cannot be evaded when it comes to the way of human beings is rightness. That which is original and cannot be disputed when it comes to the way of heaven is fate. The fact that poverty, wealth, nobility, baseness, attainment, loss, life, death are all regulated and cannot be forced is the same, whether you are a gentleman or a petty person. The gentleman, by means of rightness, makes his peace with fate, and therefore his heart is always calm. The petty person, on the other hand, uses cleverness and force in order to struggle against fate, and therefore his heart is always filled with resentment. Some commentators identify both Gongbo Liao, and Zifu Jingbo as disciples of Confucius, but this is unlikely.
I honestly don't really understand what's going on with, like, destroying of someone's corpse and stuff like what's going on.
Well, this person, Gongbo Liao, it says in the very beginning, accused Zilu of something. Not just to his face, but to the ruler, or in this case, the head of the ruling family of this state, which was the Ji family. And then another person, the funny sounding guy, Zifu Jingbo, told Confucius about this, and because of his influence, he said that since your disciple was accused by this person, I have power to have this person executed and displayed in public.
The accuser.
Because of what he said about your disciple. And Confucius answered that person saying, okay, we don't need to do that because that's kind of taking fate into your own hands. And his rightness, his virtue, speaking of his disciple, will speak everything that needs to be spoken and bring about, if you will, the real judgment, which is not something that has to be accomplished by the force of your own hand, by having this accuser publicly executed. You see what's kind of going on?
And then also he's saying not necessarily that Zilu even has to defend himself, but that his rightness will... I mean, the latter comment is that, the gentleman is settled at peace with having walked in a righteous way. So he doesn't have to make things happen. He's whatever does happen, he trusts to fate, which is correlated to decisions that lie in a higher realm, a higher authority, basically. And so what happens is that's how it's connected to fate in that sense. Fate, from a Western cultural mindset,
fate could be anything. It's not considered that way in this Eastern ancient mind. In the ancient Eastern mind, it's a settled reality, not a who knows, like flip of the coin kind of scenario. Like you see on Two-Face with Batman or whatever else. It could be this, could be that. And no one will ever know. So the ancient mindset is not that you do know, it's that you don't have to expend your energy and be all stressed out about knowing it. You trust it. So you can trust what you don't know because of what or who you are trusting, not necessarily based on what the outcome is, but on the one who decides the outcome. Does that make sense? So, you know, in a sense, this is interesting to follow this with no one understands me. Because, two, Confucius is someone who is studying heaven in a sense, or studying the earth to know heaven. And when we put this in the context of a son in God's house, he doesn't have to know everything, but he knows the Father. And that's enough. To know the Father, to know the character of the Father, to know the ways of the Father, means that whatever the end is by design and according to the heart and purpose of the one that you know. So to try to control the end could actually, especially if we manipulate it and try and force what we think outside of the one whom we know, then we may miss some of the design of God and his infinite wisdom. So heaven's looked at in the same way, that you don't have to understand it, you just need to trust it. And it is trustworthy.
I actually really appreciate how they lay out fate and things like that in this book. That's one of the things that was immediately impressed on me the first time I began reading it with you guys.
But it requires, I think, a lot of clarification to the Western mind, because, you know, modern contemporary society looks at fate in this really weird way, you know.
I think because I'm I've very been engrossed with like a lot of Eastern media and things like that, and a lot of that oftentimes draws inspiration from Confucianism and things like that. But the recent modern trend in a lot of those things has been this very romanticized ideal of fighting against fate. And I feel like that is very pervasive even in the Western mindset of you have to carve out your own destiny. That it is something that is placed in your hands, and if you don't fight against it, then you're throwing your life away. I don't know, I remember just a lot of times being in a spot where I was really, really anxious and really, I like the word you used there, the heart filled with resentment. Because that feels so often what it is like to have that. I think in my case, it felt like a burden that you need to fight against fate. I feel like that's something, I don't know how relatable this is to anybody else here. I just feel like if you spend enough time especially in the academic realm, in the college system and things like that, the mindset there is very much, if you are not fighting against fate, if you are not trying to crack it in and build your own path, then you are failing and you are going to be left behind. And I think that burden made me miserable. And I would realize so often how foolish I felt, because I would be like, most of the time it was during a shower or something like that, I would be like, truthfully, my life is pretty good right now. I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to do. I'm in a good spot. Why does my heart have so much turmoil in it? Why do I feel so anxious and miserable? And I think it's very related to that feeling of trying to struggle against something like that. And I even love that that it says you can use cleverness and force your way to struggle against it. It doesn't even deny the ability to do something like that, but it mentions what it produces in a person. It mentions the kind of heart that it fosters. And I don't know if I've fully embraced that mindset ever, because it always felt wrong to me. But I can attest to what that turmoil in the heart feels like. And so I don't know, I feel like it's been as someone who used to try to struggle against fate, I think there's a peace that comes with trusting the end result despite not being able to see it, that really is something that is kind of hard to put into words unless you've kind of experienced the difference between the two. But I think very often my prayer at night even is that I don't really care what the end is. I don't really even have an end in mind. I'm just happy to not be fighting against the flow anymore. And I just find it very, I don't know, this is one of those things that just personally I can really feel myself in, even if it's hard to express, but I don't know if anybody else has similar experiences.
The question of fate is interesting to me, especially as something like you mentioned, Jaden, that people think they can struggle against. And I think when that is something people think they can do with fate to begin with, they're actually mistaking fate for something else. And that's where you get the very common idea of fate and how it's interpreted, which is like, misinterpreted. Is fate is where everything seems to be trending. But that is actually not what fate is. And so when people say they're struggling against fate, they're struggling against the way that things seem to be going. They're struggling against a circumstance. Fate is not it is not immediately evident through circumstance. That's clearly evident to me just by looking at how Confucius himself talks about fate. I was trying to find the Analect where he is surrounded by that one military leader that was trying to take his life at one point. And he says,
Thinking he was another guy, or was that the same?
Yes, I think. I'm getting it mixed up a little bit, but Confucius' response to that is, heaven is the author of the virtue that is in me. So what can this person, he names him, I don't remember his name, what can he do to me? But what was the circumstance showing? The circumstance was saying, or the circumstance was everything seemed to be leading to Confucius's death. That's where things were going. That's how everybody was seeing it. But Confucius seems to be someone in that moment who resists fate. But he doesn't. He actually knows what fate is as a thing determined by heaven, not by circumstance, not by events. And so that's why you have someone here that actually shows a real understanding of true fate, of meaning, or of the mandate of heaven. Is a thing issued by a divine power, not something randomly formulated as a result of a sequence of events that play out in a cause and effect way in this realm. And that's where fate is misunderstood, I think. Is we pretend it's something that we can induce from the way we see things taking place. It's something that can be logically, again, inducted from the patterns around us. But that's not, fate is not a science. Fate is, it's something that you can only come to know, and as a result be at peace with, as the gentleman is described to be here, when you know who issues fate, who mandates fate. And so obviously this is kind of tying into the way I believe faith works too, because faith, or being at peace with fate, or whatever side you want to look at it from, is not obviously knowing what's going to happen. It's being settled and not knowing. So to try to figure out, or to continue to know what fate is, as if it's determined by circumstances you see, doesn't make sense in the first place. And that's what the petty person does, because he thinks he understands what fate is and tries to use cleverness or force to resist it, or to escape it, or undermine it.
Was it 1123 that you were looking at? It doesn't directly discuss fate, it's just a situation that I recalled from what you described. But it's on page 121.
No, that's not it, but I mean, that's kind of...
Well, you see that situation, it's in the last part of the commentary of 1123.
The young who troubled us is now before us again.
Yeah, this was with Yan Hui.
That was just interesting too, because they were surrounded and put under siege, and actually Zilu was going to act out in passion, trying to force something to happen.
Reminds me of Peter.
And then Confucius took out his zither, started to play. So in a sense, he doesn't care about what people think about fate, or how things are going to turn out, because he looks at things very differently.
Man, I wish I could find...
Fate's a funny word, but I would, if in any discussion about fate, I think that it would, not that they're necessarily super important and productive, but you could waste a lot of words and breath by not really knowing what someone thinks fate is. Most people think of fate in the same way that they do luck. That's my luck, or that's just my fate. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And if you don't know that that's how they think, which is a very broken view of something, and so then you further take that, because I look at it from a perspective of contemporary Christianity, which takes words like luck and fate and those don't exist, and so then they disconnect. There's a disconnect with. That's why Eastern thought is uncategorically rejected by Western Christianity, because of that type of misunderstanding of the glossary of the terminology that's used. So one, they can look at the same term and think completely different about the same term, and then just presume that they have nothing in common, and so they reject. There's a rejection and a repellent that happens there, where again, in reality, the Eastern understanding or ideal of faith is more about submission and release than it is control, or simply the unknown. And so those are not just in the determining how to tie together the Eastern and Western mind, but just like in general, when you are having communication with another person, there are certain things that are fundamental to understand how they think, how to actually understand them. Otherwise, you might just be banging heads for no reason. You know.
I found the intellect that I was thinking about. It's a 723. I don't remember if the commentary would be helpful or not. But the Master said, "It is heaven itself that has endowed me with virtue. What have I to fear from the likes of Quan Tui?" Quan Tui was a military minister in the state of Song who apparently wished to do Confucius harm. According to an account in the record of the historian, while in Song, Confucius and his disciples were one day practicing ritual beneath a large tree, when Quan Tui, in an attempt to kill Confucius, cut the tree down. The assassination attempt failed, and when the disciples urged the master to make haste in escaping the state, he delivered the remark reported here. Confucius is on a mission from heaven, and is therefore subject only to heaven's command. Human beings do not have the power to alter fate, and Confucius therefore accepts whatever may befall him with equanimity, viewing it as heaven's will.
$14.36. There you go.
Oh yeah, I guess a similar thing happens in 9.5. Surrounded in Quang this time. He said, now that King Wen is gone, that was one of the ancient Zhao dynasty kings, one of the first, is not culture or Wen now invested here in me? If heaven intended this culture to perish, it would not have given it to those of us who live after King Wen's death. Since heaven did not intend that this culture should perish, what can the people of Quang do to me? It's an interesting one. The record of the historian tells the story. Confucius was leaving Wei and was passing through the town of Quang on his way to Chen. There was a person named Yang Hu who had in the past done violence to the people of Quang, and they therefore detained Confucius because he physically resembled this Yang Hu.
Which is just like that other situation.
It's the same person. Yang Hu is the same person.
Confucius was imprisoned there for 5 days. The account goes on to note that Yang Hui had fallen behind on this journey and was finally reunited with Confucius in Quang, providing the context for 1123.
Yeah.
Bao Xian also claims that, to add to the confusion, one of Confucius' disciples was a known associate of Yang Hu. That's weird. And happened to be driving Confucius' chariot as he passed through Quang, further arousing the suspicions of the Quang people. As for Confucius being the bearer of culture, the Guliang commentary for Duke I, year 14, cites Confucius as saying, "The way of Kings Wen and Wu has not fallen to the ground. It still lives on in us. King Wen, having passed away, is not his way of being cultured truly to be found in me?" And we also Analects talk about the same heavenly appointment and bearing of culture.
36.
So he, as a result, it wasn't just a simple or foolish or ignorant believing of some sort of special or divine protection, because obviously he was still in a really dangerous circumstance. He was imprisoned, and I mean, having gone that far, he's in a sense not protected. But he wasn't ever harmed, which is interesting. So there may very well have been some kind of protection, but he wasn't really harping on that fact. It was more so heaven's will, and not like everything's going to be okay for me. even though that is kind of what the result.
Looked like it wasn't what the heart was. I think his even what can they do to me might even be what can they do to the purpose in which he has been instilled in that place. If heaven was done with him, then then his work would be done. But if heaven still had work for him to do, then he would not perish there.
But that also shows that he was very confident in the fact that he was the one bearing that culture.
Might be an interesting word study in the Analects. Confucius' view of what it was to be or meant to be a culture bearer. Seems like there's a number of Analects that correlate to that subject matter, probably some other connected ones. Be interesting to look into that a little bit to see how he thought about, because I think it's definitely going to be tied to, and it is obviously, because even the philosophy behind it is the Wu Wei approach, but the way that he carried it, what mind and heart did he have in carrying it in all that he did. It also connects to the other naysayers saying, why do you try to do the impossible, etc., etc. They all tie back to this one driving force for Confucius, and it wasn't self-attainment or notoriety. It was to be a standard bearer. 1436, I think, is interesting because it seems to be a bit later. Zilu is one who has a lot of these highs and lows, and the referenced circumstances previous to this are of Zilu acting out of passion. And but here he is the one that's accused, and there's not really much said about how he's reacting to this situation. And I think in the other circumstances, Zilu's passion was in trying to force, in this way, I mean like protect or guard the fate of Confucius' life, of his master's life. And now there's the reversal here. He's been accused. And now someone comes to Confucius to say, how do you respond to this? So that's not just Confucius' own fate in that sense. It's also the fate of one of his dear disciples.
Well, this is interesting too, because the way that Gongbo presents this to Confucius is not just, I can do this in order to protect your disciple, but he kind of slithers his way in a sense by presenting it as this person is corrupting a ruler.
Mm-hmm.
And so he should obviously be dealt with, because you deal with people that are corrupt, because you want the ruler to be supported and advised by good people. And so that would seem like an even further reason or justification for this person's execution, because it's righteous. You're dealing with the wicked.
Mm-hmm.
But again, this would all seem to be in agreement with what Confucius teaches. But Confucius doesn't just teach what to do. In fact, that's very little of what he actually taught. It was more so how you do what you do. And in this way, it's entrusting such decisions to heaven. Otherwise, going forward with Gongbo's recommendation would absolutely be taking things into your own hand. The result of that, I'm sure Confucius maybe had some things in mind about what that could actually look like if it played out, and it might not be great things, but I bet that was actually less of his concern. It's more of what he is demonstrating in making the choice that he does that was of greater import to him. Because who knows, it might have actually brought some resolve. Definitely protecting Zilu and getting rid of this ill-spoken voice that was always whispering into a ruler's ear. But the restraint that Confucius applies there, not simply for restraint's sake, but because he knows his heart as a gentleman is settled with the will of heaven. He knew instinctively that was not something. It was not something to take into his own hands, or to encourage as the course to take.
This is an interesting phrase I have in my mind. But it's like to do a righteous thing in a righteous way. And you would think that you can't separate the two. And in reality, you can't. But there is the idea of doing the right thing, but in the wrong way. Or doing something for the right cause, but not in the right way. And so it doesn't justify itself, So in essence, Confucius is saying this would be maybe an act of justice, but it might not be a righteous way to gain justice. And so it also points at what you could probably develop as some principles that you might call principles of fate. I'm thinking of one in particular that correlates to this relationship with when Jesus is in the garden and Peter cuts off the ear of the servant. What does Jesus say? Peter, if you live by the sword, see, the sword is a form of death and destruction. So it's tied to fate in a certain context. If you live by the sword, you will die by the sword. So that will in turn, it's a principle of fate at work. You see what I'm saying? So there are certain principles of life. And actually that became the thing that Zilu lost his life over, by this false principle. And people don't realize the principles by which they live and act. And that was one of the things that Confucius in his teaching and instruction was always trying to impart, where the gentleman would have these understanding of these principles of life and live by them, not try to control them.
I like the next intellect kind of plays into this interestingly. I think Elijah said he could read now. So Elijah, if you want to read, you can read all of 1437 if you like.
Okay, sounds good. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. 1437. The master said, worthy people go into reclusion because of age itself. Because the age itself is disordered. Those next in worth withdraw because their state is disordered. Next still are those who withdraw because of a discourteous expression on the ruler's face. And finally, there are those who will withdraw at a single discourteous word. This would seem to be another criticism of the excessively fastidious, which would accord with the passages immediately below concerning encounters with principled recluses. Reclusion wins the master's approval only in extreme situations, when the entire world is disordered, and even when it seems that the true gentleman, such as Confucius, will continue to stick it out even in the face of impossible odds. Liu Banan and Master Cheng argued that the progression described concerns not the moral worth of a person retiring, but rather the level of seriousness of the cause. In support of this interpretation, Liu points to Mencius, 614, which enumerates 3 reasons a gentleman will resign his office and uses the same next location. The grammar of 1437, however, strongly favors the reading reflected in the translation. The master said, those who did not. The master said, those who did. So number 7. This is an exceedingly cryptic statement that is probably out of place. Most commentators read it together with the statement above. Those who withdrew because the age itself was disordered, number 7. And there is some lively debate concerning who exactly these 7 might be. But as Shuxi concludes, there's no way to know the people mentioned. There's no way to know who the people mentioned might be. And to insist upon trying to identify them in order to substantiate the master's remark is simply to stretch things too far.
How do you see a relation to the prior?
Just as it has to do with fate mainly, and this it mentions in the commentary how Confucius, almost in spite of what he says,
seems to be grappling against fate.
Yeah, is still someone that persists even in face of certain odds, or even when the way is not in practice. And that's what I've been speaking about in the previous Analect, was whether or not the way is put into action or discarded out of the fate. Because of this following, he's talking about how people respond to that.
I think that's honestly a really, we've had a discussion similar to this now that I'm thinking of it in our young brother's time with cause and effect, and how it is so often tempting to think in terms of things like that. I think the issue with how fate is often grappled with is because we want to conceptualize it in a cause and effect way. You do this, so this will happen. When I think that intent is seemingly much more important in the conversation than cause and effect actually is. And in this scenario, Confucius is not even necessarily concerned with the effect that his actions will have, but he knows that he has received a mandate from heaven. And so regardless of whether or not his words are received in his time or later times or whatever it may be, or, regardless of what tangible impact he can actually have, that never was the concern for him. And that's clearly obvious here with him. I mean, even 1438 talks about that, him persisting despite knowing what he does is impossible. There's a way of being in alignment with fate so that it looks like you are defying it in a way, or trying to defy it, I should say. But that's because fate is not something that can be analyzed with a cause and effect mindset. I think fate is more intention based in this sense, and going along with fate is following that mandate, despite what impact it may look like it has. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. I swear there's a connection there. I just don't think I can word it well.
It's interesting how seriously the streets the preservation of the way, because I would think that the reason such a person would go into reclusion is not for their own well-being or safety merely, but rather it is because of, again, the culture that they bear and its preservation, its endurance. But even in light of this, and just how precious that culture is, there's a tempering that the masters, or that Confucius is encouraging in this Analect, where it shouldn't, it doesn't mean that there should be no courage and intent that comes from understanding why you bear that culture in the first place, which is for it to be made known and even I guess I don't know what word would be best, but taught to others, shared with others. Which is, I think, what brings the order of most to least worthy in this example. Is the most worthy person we see here is the most stout-hearted or courageous of the several mentioned. But I do appreciate how the commentary also suggests that there is an even more worthy instance, which Confucius himself exemplifies, because it seems pretty clear to me, maybe even in some Analects that explicitly mention that the age in which he lived was one that was disordered. But he still, and of course we looked at this last week or whatever week it was, he was still ridiculed by people for doing something that was basically impossible, and that was not only was bound to fail, but had failed in many ways. But as it says in the commentary, he continues to stick it out in the face of impossible odds. And so I bring that to our own circumstances and reflect on the culture that we bear in what is, I would say, even more so an age of disorder compared to when Confucius lived. And isn't that what so many people that think they did, or maybe even very well did, receive from God a new understanding and revelation of his purpose and heart, and in that way, I mean, particularly as it had to do with the way that people were to live together, and so in that sense began to, or were bearing his culture. How many of such people have kind of gone off into reclusion? Like, the first thing that comes to my mind is the pilgrims leaving
England.
Yeah, England, that system, or that religious system of the time, in order to do this new thing. There's many examples of that. And they're like, they made it so far. But there's a much more difficult and much more worthy place or kind of person or kind of people that are able to both bear and preserve the culture that has been given to them, but not go off into reclusion for its sake. It's a really interesting balance to me, because I would say where we tend to be a little limited in our view of things is in seeing just how precious the culture we bear is. And so we are prone to the vice, if you will, of neglecting or failing to preserve. Yeah, preserve. That's what I had already said several times. I couldn't think of just that. But that's I think an area of growth necessary for us. And of course, by saying us, I absolutely include myself in looking at an example like this and seeing just how seriously that was treated for them. Because again, that's what I'm suggesting was their reasons for retiring in the first place was not to protect the person, because they would get in trouble if they continued to live normally in a disordered age or in a disordered state. But it was more so because of what their lives represented and what they were carrying that was jeopardized, and which is why it was considered worthy by Confucius for such people to retire themselves. But that is obviously not how we are living to, generally speaking. There's definitely, and this is I think what shows kind of the beauty of the way we live as a community, and not like this open anybody can join kind of community, because if it was that, it wouldn't really be a community. Is there is something that we are nurturing and preserving as a result of the way we do things in that sense. But it's always good to remember why, and I would not just recall why, but pursue the real heart behind why we do things in that way, because that will absolutely shape the way we go about all of our relations, particularly those that are not within the community, with those that are not bearing that culture. So really apply this concept of reclusion, of retirement, of stepping away from the way, or to the way we consider relationships with other people outside of the community. It is worthy, in one sense, to distance yourself if you know that that culture is being threatened, if you're able to see that. But it is much more worthy for you to be able to remain and continue to bear it in such a way that it is not threatened, but it itself is the influence, rather than the other way around.
It might be helpful to, further expand some differentiation. Not that they are opposing one another, but just different understandings of what they are. And one is exclusion, and the other is reclusion. In the Confucius writings, reclusion is actually looked at negatively. And I think that while Confucius might say there were 7 potentially that were exceptions to this, the following 2 Analects indicate Confucius' standpoint for himself, whereas he could be counted among those who were deserving or would be right to recluse themselves. He chose not to. But that didn't change his principle. And so, one, I don't think that, and I'm not saying you were saying this, but we shouldn't see ourselves as reclusive, but we should see ourselves as exclusive. But why? Exclusive is not for the sake of keeping a small number. Exclusive is in relationship to principle and purpose. That's exclusive. So, if you want to play on an elite sports team, this one single team, and you come in and you enjoy being around the people and want to play the sport, but you don't want to submit to the standard and the authority and leadership that the coach brings to that team, and that the other team members have unequivocally committed themselves to. It is their first priority. Then you're going to get set apart from that team. If you don't come in with that commitment, this is not a casual commitment. You see what I'm saying? So you're not going to play on this team. So Christianity, for whatever reason, thinks that it's not exclusive. So anybody can come in and say anything that they want to about their commitment to, or their desire to be a part of something, or to claim they want to put on that jersey, but they don't want to come to practice. They want to carry the name of that team, but they don't really care what the coach has to say. That's ridiculous. So if we can make that goofy of an example out of a sport that really does nothing to offer any benefit to mankind, then how much more exclusive is a culture and a way of life that actually can heal humanity? You come into this and it's not really what you're about. You just wanted the jersey. You just wanted to wave the flag around and put the big finger and say, that's my team? Or will you commit to the discipline that it takes to become a skilled practitioner here? That's not the same. It's simply not the same. And so in relationships to others and relationships to people outside such a commitment, whether we want to call it this community or whatever else, that same standard applies in this community. Anyone, specifically from places of leadership on through the rest, which is a downward, high to low scenario, and even at a peer level should be able to say, where's your commitment here? Is this really what you're about? And so exclusivity is not, again, it's not about there's a set number, there's a set person, there's a set few people, but exclusivity is always, where's the commitment to the heart and purpose? And so that's a very important distinction to make, and a very important principle to understand, because people may use exclusion as an accusation, as if it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a meaningful thing. You cannot have life in Christ unless you receive Christ. That's pretty exclusive. And so that same principle of covenant in relationship and commitment to God should be pervasive in every aspect of life, no exceptions. And in every relationship in life, no exceptions. So it doesn't mean that there are no other relationships. It means that we have to gauge and
discern.
Yeah, that'll work. Discern every relationship based on the covenant life, the covenant way of life. And then, I mean, that was a lot of what our class on relational IQ was all about. And how do you know the difference? Well, one easy way to know the difference is how much time in your life you're given to certain relationships. That's a really easy way to tell. How much of your day, how much of your thought life, how much of your communication, and how much of your motive is given. It's a really easy way to measure it. And if something is taking a lot of time or a lot of weight in your life, that doesn't make it intrinsically bad. But it means it should become one of those things that are brought, or you bring them, you put them on the scale. Does this meet the standard of the covenant of God? That's how you work through those things. If it doesn't, then you need to ask yourself, okay, what am I doing? Am I sent here by God to set that standard so that other people can rise to that occasion? Or am I just floundering my time? Well, that's probably not very wise. Might need to let that go. That's how you handle those things. It's not easy, but it is pretty black and white when you bring them up to those things. What are my primary motivators here? Okay, we'll stop. It's 11:07. Lord, I pray that this wisdom and insight would be sought after, that it would be in the hearts, minds, and motives of this people, and these young people in particular, to rise to the occasion of your covenant relationship with one another and with others in general. Lord, that your light would shine out from within, and that they would give place for it. Bless our day, bless our time together, in Jesus' name. Amen.